Hello, people of the Facebook. I haven't done one of these live videos in quite a while, so bear with me as I figure out how to add somebody again. Not that one. I am going to be talking today with somebody who is a great intimacy teacher. She is really, really good at what she does. And I wanted to introduce her to my audience. We will be talking about how to receive. So if you struggle with receiving without feeling like you have to sacrifice everything and really claiming what you want, then this would be good for you. Hi, Jessica. Oh, crap. So I might have to start it over to see if I can invite her. Jessica, fill me in. How do I invite my guests? Facebook changes this every time. So when I come on, it's like, oh, great. It's a new thing to figure out. Okay, so I see her here. I think I can. Now I figured it out. I know there's software you can use to do this easier. I tried it and it wasn't easier either. So it is going to add my guest now. So for those watching the recording, hopefully you fast forwarded through all this junk here. Connecting. Hi, we did it. Hopefully it won't be too loud here too. I don't know if you can even hear all the birds and stuff out here.
No, just you.
No, okay, cool. Okay. So I was kind of introducing you a little bit here, and that we were going to be talking about receiving and talking about owning what we want. I know you have a course now called Appetite. That's I kind of put that in the post of we're going to be talking about appetite, because that's something I think we really shy away from, right? Embracing our appetite, and I wrote, I'm learning how to love my hunger. So a question for you: why do you think people resist diving into their appetite? Why do you think they don't like to go there?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think there's multiple different layers to it. I think there's kind of the societal layer, and then I think there's the deeper layer. So I think the societal layer, and if we're speaking to women versus men, for example, I think men have a little more approval for diving into their appetite than women do. Because for women, so much of our value has been associated with being thin and staying small. So there can be this societal fear that if, oh my God, if I dive into my appetite, I'll be a bottomless pit. And then they're keep eating. And then with sexuality, similarly with women, there's been this shaming around a woman being honest about the fact that she likes sex. So there's a lot of taboo around claiming the kind of deep depths of our hunger.
Well, I think I read something that you did. You did an interview a while ago, and you were talking about how the first work that you did was something about eating psychology. Were you did you go through a program or something of?
I went through the Institute for the Psychology of Eating.
That one,
with
yeah.
David and Emily Rosen, brilliant human beings. And that's really what started me on this whole track, because I went to school for psychology, and then after psychology, I went to culinary school. And throughout culinary school and my years in college, I had really intense negative body image and would just cycle back and forth between binge eating and chronic dieting.
Mm-hmm.
But while I didn't have an eating disorder, so to speak, my life was ruled around my insatiability and my trying to control.
Yeah, I love that word, insatiability, too. So it just kind of goes full circle of when we're talking about appetite, that physical appetite, but how much it can also, as women, seep into everywhere else. We're not allowed to pursue that appetite on a very physical, food level, right? But also deeper level. And I think it's interesting you say men are able to pursue that appetite more. Where do you think that cultural conditioning comes from? And do you think all men are really able to embrace their appetite too? Do you feel
I don't. And that's why it's I go back and forth around talking about the difference between the genders. And I know there's multiple genders now, and then we're all human. I feel because the old conditioning is that men are allowed to take up space, quote unquote, right? it's like the men who are supposed to be like in the spotlight, like out chests and things like
Yeah.
that. I mean, think of men in the boardroom, and just think of that. And then when we see like the conditioning of women, it's like, oh, there's just kind of, we're supposed to be smaller. And with men, I think there's and I'm totally generalizing here, but like
Right.
general kind of like shape society, and we're trying to dismantle that. But like the pursuit of power is a big one. Like there's a lot of power in really opening up to our appetite and our desire. And I think that's part of the deeper reason that a lot of us are afraid of opening up to our appetite, because there's so much power there that like we haven't had access to, because we've been so shamed and kind of like disconnected from it, that it's like kind of opening up to a waterfall of divine energy flowing through you. And it's like, what do I do with this power when I have access to it? Which is a good question.
I totally get that, by the way. Like, I'm just thinking of my own experiences, and that's why I wrote that post of like, I'm learning to love my hunger. And like, because it is like a power, and then when you open it, you're like, I want it all. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like I can have it all. And I think that that power can be overwhelming because you're nervous, you don't want to impose too much on those around you, and you're nervous you're going to ask for too much. You're worried you're going to be seen as selfish, or you know, especially like women, generalizing, but are people pleasers, right? Like we never really get what we want, and sometimes we've asked for what we wanted historically, right, and we didn't get it, and we faced rejection. To that point too, I was talking to my partner about this, and he was saying like men's lives are like riddled with rejection, right? Because they're the ones mostly pursuing women. They get rejected all the time from women particularly. And perhaps, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud here, of course, but maybe perhaps that's why they're able to pursue that power and that appetite a little bit more. They're used to the rejection of, you know what I'm saying?
That's cool. I like that perspective, that like men are more in the habit of like allowing themselves to get rejected. I could definitely I could definitely resonate with that, because I have like started like for myself, it's like I've noticed the places where I've been putting myself into the circumstance of like I might get rejected
Yeah.
now, and it's really deeply confronting.
Yeah.
It's a very important practice though.
It's hard because as women, we're used to having things, generalizing again, but we're used to having things come fairly easily to us, right? If we ask for something, you know, we can kind of, you know, give a sweet smile, and people are usually more accommodating to women. And
Well,
go ahead.
go ahead. Well, it's just like this is a very interesting conversation, because it comes back to this conversation of power. Where like, oh, like on the one hand, like we as women don't have approval for our appetite, but you're simultaneously saying there's this way that we can kind of like more easily get what we want because we're women. And a lot of what I explore, you know, with the women in my life and with myself is like, okay, so there's this transition from princess to queen. Like
Yes.
that archetype where the princess is kind of like wanting external validation, and she wants to look really pretty and like just kind of like get things from that place. And then there's the queen, which is like there's, and neither is wrong, like we're both on, but it's like there's this embodiment and this like ownership where we don't manipulate to get what we want, but we're willing to own what it is that we want and ask for it, and be willing to get a no, but have total approval, like just have total approval for what the desire is and what the hunger is, and to fully own it in our body is a really powerful thing.
It is, and it's so hard, and I love that analogy from like princess to queen, because that's exactly like what it's like. Because yeah, women can manipulate themselves into getting things that they want, but like I don't know, is that even real true power? Like that's not self-ownership, that's just manipulation, that's tricking somebody into what you want. It's a whole nother level to say like, no, this is what I want, I'm claiming it, and I'm not gonna throw a hissy fit if I don't get it, right? Like I'm gonna own that rejection. And for me, like I'm always assessing, if I do get rejected, I'm like, well, how much can I fill this bucket? I call them like buckets of my desires. How can I fill that bucket on my own too? Like how not blame that person for like, oh, I needed them and they shut me down or whatever. they failed me, but rather like doing a self-assessment. Well, how can I satisfy some of my own needs too? Is another way to
Mm.
look at it.
That's such a beautiful inquiry, because what you're doing is you're taking yourself out of the conditioning of that we need someone outside of us to save us, or we
Yes.
need someone outside of us, like, oh, I can't create this for myself. And that's not saying that we don't invite in partnership and that we can't be deeply nourished by relationships outside of us, but what you're
Mm-hmm.
speaking to is a very important practice for any woman who wants to feel empowered, not just in her relationships, but in creating a deeply fulfilling reality.
For sure.
Is like realizing that we don't have to manipulate in order to get what we want, because there's actually nothing wrong with what we want, which brings
Yes.
the conversation of appetite and what we're hungry for.
That's it. And that's huge too, because the manipulation thing of us like, yeah, not being upfront, like playing more of that princess role. It's again like that we're not owning it, and we're not really accepting it, and not accepting that like this is okay to have desire, especially like the desire to want more sex. I think culturally we're really conditioned of like women don't really want this, or my biggest thing, if a woman wants it, she must be a slut, she's a skank, she's a hoe, like all these negative kind of connotations, and we're bombarded with that. If she dresses this way, then she must be this. And I really admire the women out there. I've had a lot of conversations with my partner of women who really stand in that power as well, you know, saying like, this is my body, this is what I enjoy, like, and they're owning it, and they're okay with the rejection of society as well, of people calling them names and saying, oh, you're this and that, when that's not really who they are, you know?
Oh, it's so beautiful, because what it's also doing is like, when we own our desire, when we own our hunger, when we order our pleasure and our desire to be satisfied, like think of it, both food and sex, it's both receiving something into the body that can either be a beautifully present and pleasurable experience, or an incredibly like dissociative and destructive experience. And when we're not in approval of our appetite, we kind of dissociate.
We do.
Like we're not in our body, which is a recipe for disaster.
That's so
So
true.
appetite is what brings us down into our body, which is where we manifest from. It's where we create from.
Yeah. And I think too, because of like we don't own and we don't accept, we're also we what am I trying to say? You really resonated with me when you said that. We're like, say again the last sentence you just said, where we're
Which piece around when we're not owning our appetite, we're kind of dissociated from our body.
Dissociating, yeah. And then I think too, what'll happen is when we pursue and we're dissociating like that, sometimes we can have like we can blame again the person and say like you didn't fulfill this. It's like you didn't ask. You didn't ask, you weren't there, you weren't present, you weren't coming from a place, you know what I mean? You weren't coming from a place of honesty. Hold on, text message. Does that make sense?
Well, it's like what I'm hearing is that when you're not actually in your body, you can't actually advocate for yourself in the moment. That's what I heard you say.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, yes, and this is like a very big conversation with everything that's going on in Me Too and the different conscious sexuality circles that I'm running. And it's like there can, and again, I'm going to generalize, but there can be this story that like, oh, like the man should know.
Yes, that's
like,
what I was getting at. Yes.
And like what often happens is that like when we as women, when we're not in approval for our appetite for sex, we might say yes to a sexual experience that like our animal, all our primal self desires, but because we're still up in our head, not in approval for our desire, we won't be super present. We don't necessarily know what our body wants and we don't want, because like we're dissociated. And then after the fact, all this shame can come up, and then there's like a buyer's remorse, so to speak. So it's, if we're not in our body, like it's, unless someone is forcing themselves upon us,
right,
or like forcing us to do something against our will, it's like it's our responsibility to know and be in our body, and our appetite, our desire is what brings us in there.
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted you to hit on, because I think that Yeah, that happens frequently. And again, I have a lot of these conversations with my partner because I love hearing it from the male's perspective of like how they're experiencing the Me Too movement. Like I asked on my thread, on my Facebook on a thread, like, guys, what do you feel about this? And I love that we're like, we're putting some of that responsibility on the woman as well, you know, and saying like, well, we need to communicate well as well, right? There's no like blame here, but it's just like, well, what can we do too? Like we can be more responsible and really ask for what we want, be more present, right? And don't expect them to know everything that we want. Um, and also a huge one is not letting their desires overshadow our own. I think that can happen with women too, is like, well, he just wants all of these things, so I just have to be okay with that. Instead of saying like, oh, wait, I'm not okay with that. Like, this is what I want. Or women not knowing what they want, and then they don't know how to communicate that either. Or they don't know how to guide the man, or they think that they're going to insult the man, or, you know what I mean? Make them feel like they're inadequate.
You just packed like 6 conversations into like 30.
It's a lot. It's a lot there.
The first piece was like women. So I do a lot of somatic coaching work with men. So we have a very clear container of there's no kissing, there's no removal of clothing, and there's no touching of genitals. And within that container, like we're exploring like how does this man cultivate intimacy with a woman? What I'm doing is I'm helping men to like have a safe space to really express their desires and to be able to hold it with like one not feeling like I need to give him anything.
Yeah.
And to just allow men to have the like there's a lot of men who are terrified of actually expressing their desire because they're afraid that they're going to coerce a woman into something that she's going to be a no to afterwards in hindsight. So I feel a lot of the work of women is like, how do we get ourselves into such like connection to self, connection to my body, and trust that like I can hear a man's desire, and even if it's something that I'm like not a yes to, be like, thank you for sharing that with me. Like I don't feel open to that right now, but this is what I do feel open to. Like this is what I do feel turn on around. And how do we get ourselves to this place where it doesn't have to be a re-traumatizing conversation, but instead like an empowered, pleasurable, present time connection?
And it takes work on both parties to be able to do that. Like having those conversations. I know in my early 20s, like I wouldn't be able to have those conversations, you know, like they're really hard, and it's and making sure that there isn't shame around it, making sure there isn't like judgment around it. It's tricky, and that's why I really admire the work that you do. I'm like, it's really important. It's really important, especially to just keep connecting men and women and not feeling like we're trying to like take from one another, and that there's all this confusion and like regret and shame, and like it's too heavy.
It's super heavy. And like I want to share this one piece because it's like it is a really challenging conversation. Like sex in itself, like they're not easy conversations. And like part of what really opened this doorway to me, like knowing my own pleasure and being able to communicate, was I went through the orgasmic meditation coaching program, which was owned by a company called One Taste. I'm not necessarily a proponent of One Taste, but the practice in itself is basically for 15 minutes in a, you know, in a container, like very clearly, basically a woman is undressing from the waist down, and then her partner, who's completely clothed, is stroking her clitoris for 15 minutes with a glove on, and like very like no agenda whatsoever. And like in these 15 minutes, all the goal, like the only thing that we're meant to do is to just like feel. Like, do I enjoy this? Like, do I want lighter pressure? Like, do I want more pressure? Like, none of the thinking of like, what do I need to give immediately I receive? None of the like, oh, am I taking too long? Because there's all the stories that keep us as women like disconnected from the present moment because we're thinking about all the things that we need to do, all the things that we owe, and like if we're taking too long. So I really got to ingrain the experience of like, the point here is for me to experience my body.
Yeah.
And we can set this up like in our intimate relationships. And it requires mutual buy-in. Like both or all parties need to be willing to kind of like slow down and explore some discomfort.
I love that you said discomfort because I think that it's also this cultural conditioning of you need to just get to the end too. Like we can't explore our appetite can have lots of layers, right? Like there can be lots of layers of that which we desire. We don't have to just get to this hard end goal. I was also thinking another thing women think about a lot, especially like in my work, well, they'll talk about, do I look okay? Right? Like, is everything looking okay? Does my face look okay? Do my legs look okay? Like, you know what I mean? All this stuff running through your mind. I know another intimacy coach I know, she had mentioned doing even a pleasure hour. And it doesn't even, like, it's just giving to the other person. And you know, like, you have a full hour. And that, like, it doesn't, you can't have any penetration, but anything else goes. Like, whatever you want, you can have clothes on, like, you can just be snuggling together, like, whatever. But, like, there's a mutual understanding, right, of this is what's going on. Like, there's no end goal. It's just an experience of intimacy and whatever feels good.
Mm, that's beautiful. And I really appreciate the piece you brought up around, do I look good here? Because especially, I mean, I'm going to say especially for women, but like all of us human beings like want to be considered attractive.
Right.
And there's definitely a correlation of like, I like for me it's like when I'm feeling sexier, I feel in more approval of my desire. But if I'm in
Yes.
judgment of my body, like if I think like, oh, like I'm too fat, and it's like, then it can impact my experience, is that it can impact how worthy we feel of our hunger, of like of our desires being met. And
God, I want to
like,
quote that. There's like a nugget. That's like a nugget because I'm like, yes, that's it. That's totally it. Okay, go ahead.
yeah.
I just really liked that.
No, I do too, and it's so important because it's like I in the past 2 months I have gone from a place of feeling like completely unattractive and undesirable to like deeply sexy and deeply wantable. And like this is not the first time that I've gone through this spectrum, and it's like
Mm.
it actually has very little to do with the shape of my body and way more to do with like how, what is it? It's like, God, how I feel about my relationship to myself.
I was waiting for that.
That's really the thing. How much
Yeah.
approval do I have for who I am and what I'm doing and what I'm being in my life? Or how much of my attention is focused out on like what other people are thinking about me, or how much other people want me or don't want me?
Yeah, that's so true. I was telling one of my clients, I told a few women this. Of course, I don't dive deep with them into this stuff, but I was telling them like you have to find intimacy with yourself first before you go to extend it to others. And I love that you say like the shape of your body didn't change, right? Like, and I've experienced the same thing. Especially when I first started getting with my partner, I was, you know, you're nervous with a new partner, right? And I would do my own like practice where I would be like dancing, or I would do something like body oriented and something that felt just really good, and I had like a safe environment to explore, and I had music and whatever like felt good, so I could get back here, right? And I was like, I was present. It didn't matter like if I was wearing makeup or my hair was this or that. Like it mattered how deeply connected I was to my body. Then I was able to show up in that place, and I felt open and receptive to the experience.
Yeah, yeah. And this piece around receptivity, like our ability to actually receive the things that we want. It feels so key here. Like there was this piece that came up earlier around, are you familiar with the concept of the hungry ghost?
Mm-mm.
So it's the idea of the hungry ghost is like it's an archetype that we can play out when we keep consuming something, but because we're not actually present and open to receiving it, we become insatiable and like not in
Oh,
a good way. So
yeah.
it's like this around, if we're not in approval for what we want, or we don't think that we're worthy of what we want, but we're still graspy for it. And this can show up in dating or in food. Like, let's say, like, I'm eating, like, I really want ice cream, but I have total shame for the fact that I want to eat some ice cream. So I go out and buy 3 pints of Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and I can eat like all 3 pints because I'm so disconnected from my body that my body doesn't even realize that I'm actually being satiated by anything. And I
Right.
can just keep eating it
Right.
because I'm not in my body. And similarly, the hungry ghost in intimacy, it's like when we're seeking out sex, when what we actually want is like true connection with another person, which requires us to be like really present with ourselves and like really willing to be seen, as opposed to like trying to put on this picture perfect image of who we
Mm-hmm.
are. I really feel like so many of us are walking around as hungry ghosts because we're like so hungry for like the real nourishment and simultaneously terrified of being vulnerable enough to like really be receptive to it.
Yeah. Well, you just hit the nail on the head. I love the phrase hungry ghost, and I think that's, yeah, happens a lot in our society in a lot of ways. We consume a lot of trash mentally, right, and physically, and we think that that's good because it's like fast and quick and gives us a good like dopamine hit, but it's like that's not really what we want, and it's hard to receive that for sure. And it's hard to know what that is. I think it all comes back again to like really knowing ourselves, trusting ourselves, and having like radical acceptance of ourselves.
Mm.
That one is
And
huge.
being willing to slow down. Like that's the other piece. We live in such a fast culture, especially like if you're an entrepreneur or like whatever it is, like all the sex we see like in porn or whatever, it's
Right.
super fast. Just like we never have time for a meal. And it's just like being willing to like boldly say like I am going to move slower than might be comfortable for me or you,
Yeah.
but there's a deep magic in this present moment right now that actually is like the seed for everything I could possibly want in my life. And it's a boldly courageous act to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't like to be present. I know you had talked about embodiment before, and it's something I do with my work too, is like have embodiment. I'm always slowing my people down so that they're able to really experience like what does this feel like in your body? Like are you experiencing this, right? And it's really hard, especially I found with men. I'm constantly having to slow them down. Like, okay, let's count seconds. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna do this for a count of 5 seconds or whatever, or you're gonna do this for breaths. I often use that of if you're performing activity, deep breaths as you move through this repetition or whatever they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Beautiful thing that you communicate it.
yes. I'm watching the time because you said a half hour. Look at me. I have
What do you
my iPod. I don't think people own these anymore.
That's amazing.
I got this for free, so I just happen to have it.
I'm down to go for like another 5. Like what are you feeling? Like is there other pieces that you want to like drop into? I'm down to like go, and if it feels complete now, we can totally complete now.
I think we covered a lot of
We
stuff.
got in. Yeah, we did good.
Does anybody have anything to say? Whenever I do Facebook Lives in the afternoon, right, because it's 12:30, well, it's 1 p.m. there now, 4 p.m. here. Usually I think people like on my side are coming home from work and getting children. So I don't see, does anybody have any comments? I see Jessica and Liz are on here. If you guys have anything to add, I love these conversations because to me, like,
This is a spot.
it's what?
Like it's a really rich spot.
It is. And I don't think it's talked about enough. And, you know, the work that I do is all physical. It's strength, it's rehab, it's pain management. But it's all about being able to express ourselves physically, like physical liberation. And so I'm like, the sexual piece of it is so, so important. And not only the sexual piece, you know, the food piece and yeah, just claiming what we want, having that liberation, having that freedom to ask for what we want, having the freedom to enjoy our freaking bodies, right? And to like experience more joy living in our bodies. Like it's all connected. And I know you're I don't know if you finished running like you the appetite course. Did you close it out?
It's launching on Monday. It's
Okay.
open to 6 women. It looks like it's full. I haven't officially confirmed the 6th person, but It looks like it'll be full, but this is something like appetite is going to be growing and expanding because there are so many different pieces here, like around desire and boundaries and receptivity and surrender and jealousy and all
Oh,
these
yeah.
different of like how do we show up as like fully alive, vibrant, desirous human beings who are simultaneously really grounded, really open and receptive and connected to the world around them, so that like and we can weave this together. So yeah, that's what I'm turned on by.
That's
And
awesome. It doesn't surprise me that all your people are in there. Um, and that's why I was hoping to like show you to my audience. I'm like, you guys are gonna like this girl.
well, and
So
likewise,
yeah,
let's
Liz.
drop in with you. I really appreciate
Yeah,
your energy and just like you feel really dropped in, and it's really great to talk with you.
thank you. Liz, I saw you'll watch after and ask questions. More than welcome to. So I guess we will pop off. I'm sweating already out here because I'm in Florida. So I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go in. So I think you're freezing a little bit as well. That's usually when you know, like, okay, the internet connection's like, oh, I'm done. So thank you. Thank you for coming on, having this conversation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with this. And I'm sure we will connect soon. Did
I'd
she
love that.
crash?
Total pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.